Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. And boy, have I been waiting a long time to do this video, and in a way, I could have done it sooner, but there's just a timeless appeal of the discourse to me. I had bigger fish to fry at the time, so I left it in the lake. But now, The Right Opinion has his rod out. Wait, that sounded much better in my head. But anyhow, before we go off on a tangent about The Right Opinion's rod, this man is Michael McCrudden. Michael McCrudden is a person. I use person to the most broad effect, but he does still classify in my books as a human being, just about. He has been the topic of hot controversy in the last few months. You see, Michael McCrudden owns his channel, in which he talks about celebrities before they were famous, after they were famous, their rich life, a few other side series, and most notoriously, before they were gone. We'll be using the last one to talk about a lot of questions that have been flaring up amongst the community, because McCrudden has probably been the best example of what happens when people become slightly too opportunistic and slip into the public eye. But why? Well, when someone passes away, many think it's important to be respectful of the deceased and give them and their family some space during the times of mourning. However, McCrudden's philosophy has come to show that he might not be so concerned with that. Now, I've always been aware, vaguely, of McCrudden's channel, but more as an onlooker rather than a commentator. He's a significant size, in spite of the incredibly inconsistent view counts. Other than the regular allegations that not all of his facts are completely accurate, the first taste of controversy that he gave me was when my friend James Merritt decided to release a video criticizing him. I definitely urge you to check out James's content. It's very good, and that particular video is one that we will definitely revisit in a bit. It definitely levels some very legitimate criticisms. I considered covering it back then, but it wasn't exactly my cup of tea. However, over the last couple months, it is definitely brewed, and now The Right Opinion is ready to serve up some piping hot Earl Grey. Delicious. Michael McCrudden, on the other hand, is finding himself in a metaphorical sort of hot water. After the sudden death of extremely popular and equally controversial rapper XXXTentacion, he was criticized for making not one, not two, but 3 videos in quick succession, all capitalizing on this event. They were shameless to say the least.
No matter what genre he stepped into or what he was talking about, everyone knew there was a real, unique artist here, a true talent, one of a kind.
This led to a lot of outrage and criticism, which subsequently led to a lot of videos, and then consequently led to a lot of people asking if these videos were hypocritical and how they behaved, and if McCrudden was even in the wrong at all. People were tripping over themselves in an attempt to have the moral high ground. A similar situation occurred earlier this year with Logan Paul. Many asserted that those who made videos on his little voyage were no better than him, particularly those who then decide to monetize and sponsor those videos. And when there are slight details like the ones in question, it doesn't necessarily make you a bad person because you may not be thinking about it. However, I am The Right Opinion, the blessed messiah for all your argumentation, and I've been mulling over this for a while, and I propose myself to be the one to lay out some conditions that may affect whether a situation could be considered distasteful and to help you have a clearer grip on your opinion. Allow me to clarify that in this video I will mostly be avoiding pushing for one position. If you're here for the more opinionated content, don't worry, there's plenty of that to come in the future. But this is a bit more of an analytical piece. I will state my opinion at the end after applying all the conditions that I deem relevant, but the thing is there are many reasoned arguments that can be made for all points of view in this instance. But hopefully by the end we'll be able to distinguish the I'm Alex's from the Michael McCruddens, if you know what I mean. You might come out thinking neither of them were acceptable. You might come out thinking both of them were acceptable. But let's clear the air and understand why we think are acceptable. Alright? Great. Can't think of anything else to say, so that was a nice, short, dicey intro. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Today I will be talking about XXXTentacion in large volumes. It makes sense, in a way it is the inflammatory source of the video. Without this Michael McCrudden saga, this probably wouldn't exist. However, most people will not be attacking me for mentioning it, monetizing it, in the same way that people attack McCrudden. What changes the situation? Context. It's a simple answer, but it's easy to forget when people are riled up about topics. There are many elements of context and ones that we should be breaking down very concisely. We're going to use multiple examples. I'll be using McCrudden's, probably James Merritt's, and also probably I'm Alex's, because I know those videos well, and I understand what was being said in them. And these are all interesting cases which can yield some strong debate. So let's break it down, because McCrudden is not a commentator. And in the McCrudden videos, XXXTentacion's death was a primary subject. It was the key clincher for a lot of viewers. He advertised them as videos on the topic and had them central to the videos at hand. Generally, I find these sensitive topics as a commentator either come across as primary or secondary subjects. Obviously, the primary being what I've just described, the one where you make it the central point. However, videos like this one that you're watching right now may include it as a supplement. Generally, I think most of the scrutiny focuses around videos that have it as their primary topic. However, a very interesting debate around YouTube is obviously the unique culture within that prevails secondary topics. Clickbait culture. The fate of a 10-minute video could hinge on a brief glance of a thumbnail and title, and therefore a title can actually be more important than the topic of a video in determining whether an action is disrespectful or not, because it's the views that will bring you any subsequent traction and ad revenue. So although in many cases the topic of the content may define how someone judges it, it's more how you gain the attention that would dictate whether it's more or less acceptable. So in YouTube's position, you might have the topic as a secondary on the video, but still be using their death to a significant effect. This is why some people raise the issue with I Am Alex's video, the idea that although his video was more focusing on others and their reaction, his title and thumbnail referenced XXXTentacion much more heavily than the subject of his actual video. And therefore he drew people in because he prioritized XXXTentacion's death as the subject in his thumbnail and title. But I can understand why people accused him of hypocrisy, despite the fact that his video was fairly strong in all of its points. And obviously, equally important is what you say when you have the attention. If it's a secondary topic, it's much more likely that you've integrated it with a greater narrative regardless, so there's not much to debate in that instance. However, in your primary topic, ask yourself, why are you doing the video? What are you going to bring to the topic? With someone like Michael McCrudden, although the topic is consistent to his channel, he clearly lacks a knowledge in the topic while still acting like he was somewhat familiar with the individual in question. There is nothing in his videos apart from surface level observations, nothing to develop on his character, and nothing anyone could really not find elsewhere. And he can't even pronounce the school's name despite having an image of it on screen. It's Margate,
which led to him getting expelled from Margaret Middle School.
Margate. Margaret. Even me just saying that is more insightful than anything he says in his content. The closest he gets to having a firm opinion is comparing XXXTentacion to Elvis Presley, and all that shows to me is how little he knows about cultural impact.
And when speaking about him, I would describe him or put him in the same box as Tupac, Elvis, and Kurt Cobain.
But it was clearly an appeal to XXXTentacion fans rather than a genuine statement. He always encourages people to leave their condolences in the comments below.
I mean, the man was only 20. So please leave your condolences in the comments down below.
And once again, to the unassuming fan, they probably wouldn't think twice about that, but everyone knows that it aids the algorithms when a commenter engages. He loves taking advantage of the fans. He does the cheapest job possible, and that's what annoys many people, justifiably so. And make no mistake, McCrudden is an actor. He ended up on YouTube from an advert on Craigslist.
Then one day on Craigslist, I saw a post looking for a YouTube host.
It's clear he never had an intimate relationship with the platform, and it's not like he's lacking charisma necessarily, it's just clear that he's on autopilot. And when you're talking about someone's death, it seems somewhat important that you have a passion for the subject, especially when covering it. Although the Before They Were Dead series seems congruent with McCrudden's channel, it's hard to see it as a passion for what he talks about. I'm Alex applies principles of morality with a conviction. He expands on base information, whereas McCrudden touches base with a plethora of points but never applies them, so he seems about as personally invested as someone reading off a teleprompter. This is a case of every one of his videos, but when applied to a situation that many would describe as fairly sensitive, it makes it even more tasteless, which is another thing we should break down, the sensitivity of a situation. I think people felt defensive over the fact that the situation involving X was one that ended rather abruptly and violently. There was still a lot of unanswered questions, and here McCrudden was pumping out those videos. A very interesting truth I've noticed was that people appear to be more defensive when the dead person was young or was a victim of tragic circumstances. I noticed a lot of people having banter about Stephen Hawking upon his death. However, it seemed much more taboo when someone like X died. I think many people have the stern don't take advantage of a tragedy principle. Don't capitalize on someone else's suffering. Suffering here is much stronger when there is an abject factor changing these circumstances. His life has not been brought to a tender close, it's been cut cut short. And here's McCrudden milking it until the cows come home. Speaking of capitalization, that's another important asset to consider. How much is a person gaining from talking about this person's death? Why do many people refuse to monetize a video on such topics? Because they don't want to be seen as taking advantage of their death or any other catastrophes at that. However, McCrudden, once again, is not concerned with that, and will slap multiple ads and even a cheeky sponsorship deal fully integrated with the topic.
To make this all happen, we do have a sponsorship with Candy Pens, and they've graciously stepped forward to help out with this video. That's right, your boy McCrudden is a smoker, or at least I used to be. I've since found a new alternative through my collaboration with Candy Pens, and it's allowed me to find a better aromatherapeutic way to not only deal with stress, but to relax and, enjoy myself from time to time. Now, Candy Pens, they also have strong ties to the rap and hip hop community, with co-signs from the like of DJ Khaled, Amber Rose, Young M.A., and XXXTentacion's fellow 2017 freshman class list member, P&B Rock.
Admittedly, it is funny how awkward it is, but it's still rather depressing in context. On top of that, even with the very short time frame since X's death in which these videos were made, McCrudden failed to bring any new attention necessary to these situations or any new outlook. He just rode on the coattails himself. Nothing that would add depth to the context that he provides. But let's apply it to what we've just discussed, and as a fair follow-on, let's ask, why does McCrudden cause all the outrage? Well, when it comes to the most shameless, exploitative content on a situation, it's quite easy to see why McCrudden is viewed as one of the worst on the spectrum. Of the conditions listed, he shows very little core interest on a topic, adds minimal transformative value, completely capitalizes on the popularity without bringing any insight himself, and milks it until it's dead. And milks it after it's dead too, visibly. Ironically, this makes him one of the most morally consistent people on the platform because it's easy to keep a moral code when you barely have one. Therefore, he's always somewhat above any criticism because the debate over acceptability of topics is not one that can necessarily be decided by fact. It is just a simple case of where you draw the line personally. Unfortunately, it's hard to base such topics on any foundation of absolute truth, so this leads to people saying, well, he can do what he wants, and others going, well, that doesn't make it right. With that said, I do not even believe McCrudden is the worst offender. For all the criticism that can be brought about him, an individual like I'm J Station is incrementally worse, as he is manipulating the circumstances around the death and using aggrieved fans and their hope that he might have something else to say after his passing. That is fairly disgusting. But people identified that much more easily. Anything that involves active deception for emotional manipulation, in my opinion, is fairly pathetic, particularly when you're claiming to speak on behalf of the deceased individual. The subject matter only makes it worse. I think the morality is extremely clear on such an issue. Yeet yeet. Let's hit 100k likes for XXXTentacion, lads. We all know it's what he would have wanted. He also loved his own comment. If that isn't a sign of degeneracy, I do not know what is. But the problem comes with commentary on the issue of how you avoid being a hypocrite when you're calling someone out, and to a degree, can you? The problem when discussing issues like morality is that it's a constant trap to avoid yourself being caught out, and it often leads to allegations of the hypocrisy that we've just said, and so on. Why is this? Mainly because people place different emphasis on the assets that we've outlined today. Some would argue that what you say in a video is irrelevant compared with how you advertise or what you gain off it. Others would say it's just as comparable. And in fact, sometimes people will hate you more than the person you're criticizing, particularly as commentators choose to take the moral high ground. People like McCrudden never claim to be moral, and without commentary, they'd never be criticized. As you probably see, McCrudden's ratios are still pretty fine, in spite of the obvious exploitation.
Now, we have made a number of videos in this series. I'm talking Notorious B.I.G., Tupac, and Elvis, and I truly believe that X, a friend of the show, well, he deserves a place next to these musical legends.
Another important question is what makes this sort of exploitation any worse than the reporting in the media. After all the news sites are rushing to report it and typically dramatize it, and they all run ads on it too. It's a fair question and one that we have to reapply in a way. Generally, we accept journalism sites under the premise that they report the news, so it's fairly ordinary that they would report this and have it monetized too. McCrudden might say, well, if they can do it, why can't I? And I don't think anyone really has a problem with reporting the death of XXXTentacion. if that's what is expected. However, people do have a greater problem with media culture in the race to the bottom that they conduct. The only reason why we don't make videos on the media every time a shitty story is published is because we'd be making videos every fucking day. Mainstream media is criticized for putting clicks before actual stories. Commentators are just trying to keep YouTube under the pulse to avoid falling down the same road. Just because it's expected doesn't mean it's accepted. We have a different moral code on YouTube, and one that I will definitely discuss later. The other point of the news is that in spite of my numerous criticisms of them, they do assist distribution of information to new audiences. Many people from certain backgrounds may not be aware of the rapper known as XXXTentacion, whereas I highly doubt many of the YouTube demographic found that McCrudden was breaking any news, particularly by the third time. So let's roleplay. You're an upcoming YouTuber and you want to call all these bellends out because you don't think it's justified that grave robbers like McCrudden should be making money off other people's grief. That is fair enough. It's not a universal sentiment, but there's a strong case to be made. Let's ask a question. How do you call these people out while making sure you're not indulging in these same practices? Even in such a ravenous genre like commentary, most of your audience will not notice. But if you're not careful, it may come back to bite you when another more pedantic commentator picks it up and hones in on you. Because when you actually make it, the knives are never far from your throat. So let's bring back the point about secondary topics. Given the way it's delivered, commentary tends to make most of these subjects secondary. We normally talk about other people using these particular topics. Therefore, it's important to make the individual in question the main target rather than the topic that they're talking about, particularly if you want to advertise it as that. I think that the risk you run with advertising it as the death topic is that if you then monetize and sponsor the video, it can make you very susceptible to being accused of acting no better.
And just so you guys know, I don't have control on whether you see ads on that video, as it has been monetized by X-affiliated group. But the reality is I have to keep the lights on, I have a team to pay, so you know, I just want to keep bringing you videos each and every day. We do have a sponsorship with Candy Pens, and they've graciously stepped forward to help out with this video.
You're profiting off advertising on a video that you present about someone's demise, regardless of the content of the video. If you're not profiting off the video, then many would argue subscriber gains and views counters benefit themselves. At that point, it's important to look on how much the video may be appealing to the algorithms, dishonestly at least. If we scoot over to I'm Alex's video, bar the satire tag, which people are in my opinion wrongfully correlating with algorithm sidestepping mechanisms, the tags are strictly relevant. Using slightly irrelevant tags of views is not looked on badly. Most of the community does it, but when dealing with certain topics, it might be best to hold off. Many people would argue that those topics shouldn't be about views, even if you have a point to make. Now, to point to a video that does this would be to point to James Marrick's video on Michael McCrudden. As it's advertised, it's prioritizing the primary topic. It addresses exactly why his depiction is an exceptional example and does not milk the secondary topic nor seeks to exploit any audience grief. However, this does lead to some more deeper, more moral conundrums, and it's amazing what a simple topic like this can lend. Let's go there now. Just now, I mentioned that if you're a commentator, that to avoid being hammered as a hypocrite, you need to be somewhat sensitive with advertising. However, there is another argument that addresses this point from a different perspective, and this is the means-ends point. And it's necessary that I present these arguments because everyone has these core feelings, and I know some people watching right now may have the nagging feeling that there is a case for being a bit dirty on the promotion of a well-intentioned video, even if it does risk running the point of hypocrisy. The reason that some people feel this way is because we look at people like McCrudden doing all these scummy actions to gain traction, and we want people to see our videos calling them out. And we know that if they're using underhanded tactics to own the algorithm, we want people to see our videos on them. And to make sure they're not taking advantage of that audience, we want to help make people aware. It becomes a question of the greater good. And it's a legitimate point, and one that must be considered. In those instances, I think it is partly about the point you're making. And if you're going to be a bit more clickbait with your topics, at the end of the day, you're never going to please everyone. However, if you focus on the primary topic enough on an individual like McCrudden, and you have a strong point to make while keeping it consistent with the tone of the channel, then you can use that secondary topic. I will make this video slightly attractive to the human eye, and that's mainly because it will be advertised as a piece about McCrudden, and the point about XXXTentacion Tentacion comes secondary. You shouldn't be shy about a piece if your inclusion of the topic is somewhat natural and necessary. And I'm trying to think of the most basic way to break this down for you lads. This is something that is actually quite a common discussion in the political sphere of YouTube, particularly the more controversial sects of the wings. At what point is it necessary to do something immoral to prevent a perceived greater evil? The issue is that applied here, your normal audience may not view McCrudden as a greater evil when they are first introduced to your video, and therefore jumping in with perhaps questionable actions, even if we want to think that what we're doing is something better, in a way convincing people that you're an authority on these things means behaving in a way that will reflect said principles, particularly on first impressions. With that said, if we want to become slightly Machiavellian in this bitch, most people probably won't notice subtle appeals to the algorithm, although you'll probably be criticized even more if you're caught out. So my advice is, if you do it at your own risk. It's not necessarily a bad thing to make sure people are seeing you calling McCrudden out, but at the same time, you will risk undermining your own credibility. Logic and argumentation. As commentators, when we make a video, we choose the point to make. This is where we select the thesis. So we might select the thesis, Michael McCrudden is a shitty human being, which is a fairly monetizable topic on concept. However, when attempting to prove that argument, you might come across certain topics that are more sensitive. However, to use those topics doesn't necessarily undermine the truth of your point. It just means that you may need to refer to them. If you're doing a channel where you constantly call people out for taking advantage of others, then you might feel you deserve a fair bit of dollar for it. I think it's just important in those instances to make sure you're being honest with what you're advertising. This, however, leads us to another question. When we say people shouldn't be exploiting sensitive situations, what do we want to be the result of it? There's a really interesting video made by Willie Mac Show. It's quite a controversial piece, and I've even argued about it with him. However, in the video, he attacks PewDiePie and H3 for criticizing Logan Paul's treatment of the Japanese culture in the run-up to the incident. He asserted that what they did was rather hypocritical given their history. However, a greater point that I took is that we must be careful with how we approach such topics so that we, as commentators, are not caught in the crossfire. As mentioned earlier, YouTube has a very different culture to media. It's one that I'm pretty proud of, to be honest. We tend to feel a lot more inclined to look at a person's moral fabric rather than the reactionary attention of actions. We must be careful to clarify about what we are criticizing people for, and we must hold on to a very concise narrative and look at the person and look at the action and create a context, and don't just leave it to the audience, and most importantly in this case, the media. As a collective, we should be careful with what we condemn. Everything I've discussed today is relevant, because if we go around pointing fingers at people for doing certain things on vague terms, we might cause the rules to be imposed on ourselves that equally fail to distinguish the context that we didn't do when we made those videos. When people call others hypocrites, it's not because they're necessarily trying to undermine us, it may just be that we haven't argued or presented or even advertised our points properly, particularly when you consider the sort of grudge the mainstream media do have against the platform. Many of us do think it's fair to distinguish between the chaotic good YouTubers like iDubbbz and the sort of creed that McCrudden represents. We also need to think about what we expect in response to these actions. Many people justifiably wanted action taken against Logan Paul for his little forest excursion, but should we really lump his preceding actions onto that? Would we really want for the other situations to necessarily be punished? What do we want for people like McCrudden? Probably not the same. Mostly, I think it's just really important to put forward a compelling case and allow the audience to deduce why maybe they shouldn't be supporting these YouTubers. We should try and convince them that McCrudden is not worth watching, rather than have the greater website intervene, because the algorithms that they will run are general. They don't distinguish the levels of context that I've discussed today. If they did, that would be fantastic, but they won't. We all know that would be wishful thinking. Displaying morality on this platform is a lot more complex than it might seem on the surface, dealing with sensitive topics, calling out others who exploit them, while not being labelled hypocrite, and knowing what is worth calling out and how to avoid jeopardising our own content through it. It's quite a spiderweb in which it is easy to be caught in, but it's always important to retain that control. However, with some thought, you can hopefully clear up the bearings on your moral compass and be able to make those strong statements, like the one I'm about to make. Michael McCrudden is a scummy human being, and he capitalizes on the suffering of other people. Judging from what we've observed, his motivations are anything but pure. For example, the Lil Peep video that we discussed earlier, briefly made by James Marriott, pointed out how he literally copied and pasted his content from a month before. That is not someone who cares about these people who have died tragically. You know, Tentacion, very controversial bloke, without a doubt, but I would say there are many people, even people I know, who clearly had their lives affected by him, even though I don't completely get it. And therefore, for McCrudden to step in, to act like he had some sort of connection with him, to act like he had something to bring, 3 times over. He's not a nice bloke. Anyhow, those are my thoughts on morality, Michael McCrudden, and so much more. I would love to hear what you think about it because it is a very complex topic and I know that we're not completely dealing with all the intricacies right here, right now. However, hopefully it does stimulate some sort of discussion that we can take forward. Hopefully it will inspire people to draw a much clearer line on how they feel about these topics. Let me know down below. I'd also like to thank my editors who've once again done a fantastic job. I will leave all their links in the pinned comment most likely. Definitely check them out. I can't give them enough credit. They just do a great job every single time. Not too much else to say. If you want to reach me on Twitter, @TheRightPinion, Facebook, Discord, links below. You can find me all there. I'm an accessible person and I do my best to be. However, until we reach that bridge, I'm The Right Pinion and I'll see you in the next one.